Hi there. My name is Meg Bingle, and I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at the University of Chicago Law School. Today, or tonight, I'm here to tell you a little bit more about the interview program and to give you some helpful tips as you sit there preparing for your UChicago interview. So first things first, who does UChicago Law interview? Unfortunately, we cannot interview all of our applicants. Our interviews are by invitation only. And all of our interviews are conducted in a virtual setting via Zoom. In fact, we were actually ahead of the curve on that Zoom thing. Interviews are typically granted to people who we want to learn more about. So there's something in your file that has piqued our curiosity, something that we want to know more about. Contrary to what your friends on Reddit say, you do not need an interview at UChicago Law to be admitted to our class. Granted, we do interview many of our applicants, but you do not need an interview to get admitted to UChicago Law. Now, that being said, if you do get invited to interview, please take us up on it. You know, the interview process is a really great way for you to introduce yourself to us and to give us a little bit more information about yourself. But interviews are also a two-way street. So not only are we going to learn more about you in that process, but you're going to have an opportunity to learn more about UChicago in the process. So make sure you do your research and bring your questions because we are excited to answer them in the interview process. The other important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about our interview invitations is that we're using the same holistic review process to determine who we interview as we do with our admissions process. So it's never just cherry picking LSATs and GPA. It really is the whole package. So as you're sitting out there, if you haven't applied, please keep that in mind. And again, just if we invite you to interview, please take us up on it. Now, how do you get invited to interview? First things first, it's probably a given, but you have to apply to the University of Chicago Law School or the University of Chicago's JD MBA program in order for you to get an interview invite. The interview happens after your file has gone complete and has gone through the first round of review. So you have to make sure that you've gotten all of your application materials into LSAC or into the the JD MBA application that's available on Booth's website. And you need to have both of those files be completed before you can get into our interview queues. The way that we will invite you to interview is via email. So we will send you an email that will have a link to our appointment scheduler. Important things to note on that email. Please make sure throughout this entire law school admissions process that you are checking your spam folder. Every once in a while, I'm not quite sure why, our interview invitations find their way into spam filters. This seems to particularly be the case if you're using a .edu email address. So please keep that in mind. Check that spam folder. You don't want to miss good news like an interview invitation. We are reading files and completing files in the order that we get them. Therefore, we are actually doing that with our interviews. We are interviewing them in the order that the files are going complete based on our review queues. Please note that it does take a little bit of time for you to get through our review queues. So please be patient. Know that we are reading as quickly as we can, and we are sending out interview invitations as quickly as you can. So let's assume that you do get invited to interview at UChicago Law or as a part of the JD MBA program. You've gotten that email, you've gone to the link. That link takes you to Appointment Plus. You will see all of our open interview slots. Please pick one that works for you. After you select the one that you get, you'll get a confirmation email. It'll confirm the time and the date. Please note, this happens every single year. All of the times that you are going to see on Appointment Plus are going to be in Central Time. So if you're in a different time zone, and especially this year, I know that people are in all kinds of different time zones, please make sure that you're noting that all interview times are going to be listed in Central Time. After you get your confirmation email the day before your interview, you will get a reminder email that will again confirm the date and time and confirm that it is in Central Time. Now, how do you prepare for your interview? The most important thing that I want to tell you today is that you don't really need to worry about preparing for your interview. You know, we're not going to ask you any law questions. We're not going to ask you any business questions. If you're in the JD MBA program, you know, I'm not going to ask you any sort of, hard curveballs or things that should throw you for a loop. I always say this, I always make this silly joke, but, I left my deposition days in my litigation career. Now that I'm a higher ed, I am not in the business of grilling people. So please know that at the end of the day, all that we are hoping out of these interviews is that they are a conversation, is that it's either you and me, some other member of the admissions committee here on Zoom, just having a conversation. So I know that it's very easy for me to sit here and say, don't get stressed out, don't overly worry about it, but please keep that in mind. But also know that, of course, there are going to be some things that you can prepare for, some things that you should be thinking about. In every single interview that I have conducted at UChicago, and I know that almost every member of our admissions committee is the same way, there are a handful of questions that we're guaranteed that we are going to ask you. So, if you're applying in our JD program, I'm going to ask you, why do you want to go to law school? If you're applying in the JD MBA program, I'm going to ask you, why do you want the JD? Why do you want the MBA? Some combination of that. And for all of those programs, I'm going to ask you, why do you want to come to the University of Chicago? Having a really well thought out, prepared response to that seems very natural, that you've taken the time to think about and that you've done your research on, that really stands out in the admission cycle. So if you're nervous and you want to prepare and you don't know where to start, thinking about that, why do I want this degree? And why do I want this degree at UChicago is a great place to start. Outside of those questions, we're probably going to ask you about your resume or maybe something that we've seen on your transcript. I can just tell you from my own experience, and I know that several members of the admissions committee here are the same. We love seeing that you have been involved in, research and writing or something like that. So if you have a thesis or you have a dissertation, something like that, there's a very good chance that I am going to ask you about that. Same thing with, a really unique work experience, or I will admit, I am a total sucker for the interest line on a resume. So if you've got some really interesting interests, how many more times can I say interest? If you've got some unique interests going on in your resume, chances are I'm going to ask you about it. And, those are all questions that I'm sure that you have answers to because you put it in your resume, you put it in your file. It's important to you. Another really, prominent line of questions that we will ask are questions that honestly have no right answer. So a classic example of that is in the last cycle, we really enjoyed asking the question of, if you could ask one historical figure, living or dead, one question. Who is the figure and what is the question? We got so many different types of answers to that question. And they really ran the gamut, from people wanting to ask William Shakespeare things, President Obama, Beyonce, they were all over the place. But each of those answers and each of those figures that the students chose, they showed us something about the person that was on the other side of the Zoom call. And it was interesting. So that's definitely something that we're probably going to ask you, some sort of variation of that. But also know, we understand sometimes that these interviews can be, a little bit nerve-wracking. You can be under stress. I understand that. So please know that every single year I have had students on the other side of an interview where I will ask a question and they just look at me and they will say, you know what, Meg, I don't really have an answer to that question now. Or there'll be, a long gap, something like that. A lot of times I will just move on to the next question. I'm not going to leave you hanging in the wind. Don't worry. But I can tell you that some of the applicants that really stood out to me were the students who got themselves into a situation like that. And who later in the interview, maybe towards the end, were like, Meg, can I take a minute and answer that question? You asked it earlier. I want to go back to it. Or they did it at the same exact time. Maybe they got that question. There was that minute where they're like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm going to say. And they looked me directly in the camera and they're like, you know what, Meg, do you mind if I take a minute to think about that question? And then they came out with an answer. Know that that is a very strong interview technique. It was something that really showed a lot of maturity in those interview applicants. So don't hesitate if something happens like that. Know that we see it all the time and know that there are students running around the University of Chicago on the JD and the JD MBA side who've had situations like that. So relax, don't worry, we completely understand. Now let's talk a little bit more about specifics on the day of your interview. So first things first. Make sure that you have familiarity with Zoom. We are going to be using Zoom for this interview cycle. So on the day of your interview, probably about a half an hour before the interview, maybe a little bit before then, but as close to a half an hour before, you are going to get an email from the interviewer. The email is going to include a Zoom link to their Zoom room. When you go on Zoom at the appointed time, you will be placed in a waiting room and the interviewer will let you in at the appointed time. So, as I said, get familiar with Zoom if you're not already. Make sure that you have a working camera, make sure that you have working audio, make sure that you are in a quiet space, make sure that you have a professional background. You would be surprised, honestly, some of the things that people have going on in their backgrounds where it really just makes me wonder like, ooh, that was really the background that you wanted to choose for your law school interview. So think about that. Make sure you are dressed professionally. That was a piece of advice that I've been giving out for years, but now that it's, everyone's more familiar with Zoom and we've got a little bit more used to the setting, I probably don't even need to give that to people anymore. And make sure, honestly, that you also recognize that, we are human too. So we completely understand that there will be Zoom issues, that there will be internet issues. I filmed this entire video this afternoon and the audio cut out at the 9-minute mark. And here I am refilming it. So we completely understand that stuff like that happens. Reach out to us, email us ahead of time if you know that you're having internet issues and we'll work on a phone call. If Zoom cuts out in the middle, stay in touch with us so we can make sure that we can get the most, the heartiest interview possible. But also know that, we understand that life happens. One of my favorite interviews, and I've been doing this for a while, one of my favorite interviews is actually a young woman who was doing great in her interview. And right around like minute 15 or something, I could just see that like her eyes changed, right? Her look changed. And then I saw the background of her call. And there was a stairway right behind it. And you could just see a little head bopping his or her way down the stairs. And this woman, that she took that minute and she was very surprised and sort of nervous and worried. But then she said, you know what, Meg, do you mind if I take a moment to settle this down? I will be right back. She muted herself, undid her video, sat her kid down, did whatever she needed to do, came almost immediately right back on and killed the end of her interview. That's something that really stood out to me. It showed maturity. It showed professionalism. And ultimately, that's something that's very important to being a successful lawyer, to being a successful business person. So please keep that in mind. We completely understand things will happen, but that maturity, professionalism, that goes a long way. The last thing that I want to leave you with is something that I said at the very beginning of this. Interviews are a two-way street. So as much as we are excited to get to know you, you should be using these interviews to get to know us. So research UChicago Law, research the JD MBA program, have some questions. We can answer a lot of them in the interview setting, but I can tell you, if you bring me a question that I don't know the answer to, I will go out and try to find you an answer. So know that you can bring your questions to the interview. It also shows that you're really interested in UChicago and excited about coming to us, which again goes a long way because at the end of the day, an interview is advocating for yourself. You want to show us that confidence. You want to show us that you want to be here. So keep all of that in mind. So with that, I want to wish you good luck in the law school admissions process, and thank you so much.